this video, we're going to talk about my hard-learned lesson on overpaying for comic books. We're going to talk about pricing comic books, some tips for how to be successful in today's market or any market. And then finally, we're going to talk about capitulation, or in other words, surrendering to the reality of what the current market conditions are. But before we hop into that, a couple announcements here. We have some winners for the month of May. For the YouTube channel giveaway, congratulations to Michael Grody. You won the 2 slabs for the YouTube giveaway for May, and congratulations to David A. for the newsletter at brycecomics.com. You won the 2 slabs for the month of May over there. We have 2 brand new giveaways. Subscribe, comment, and like. And this month you're also entered to win 2 free slabs here on the YouTube channel, and we have another 2 slab giveaway at brycecomics.com. If you sign up for the newsletter over there every single month, you stay subscribed, you are entered to win a free slab. We just got a new collection in. If you're watching this the day it comes out, so head over to brycecomics.com, check out the new collection, use code COLLECT10 for 10% off all in-stock items. The second announcement I want to say is I'm looking for some old school collectors with some crazy comic book stories to tell. I want to do a video series, or at least one video, just interviewing some old school collectors in the community that have some interesting stories to tell. As simple as that. Preferably, you know, something of buying and selling, maybe going to cons in the 80s, stuff like that, just to have entertainment value. And as, you know, a relatively young collector, I always like to reach out and hear from and learn from and glean as much information as I can from the seasoned veterans of our hobby. I think it will help, you know where we came from, and also will help, you know, predict trends for the future. And I think it will be entertaining as hell to do a video called Old School Collector Tells His Craziest Stories. So if that's you, please reach out to me, brycecomics@gmail.com, or hit me up on Instagram, shoot me a DM over there at brycecomics. So this video was sparked by a gentleman who reached out this morning, and he wanted a quote on what I could offer him for one of his grails. And we'll hop over to the computer here while we're doing this. He had an Amazing Spider-Man #1 in a 3.0 and was wondering how much I could offer. And so I went and looked at the sales here. Amazing Spider-Man #1 has a really great little recent sale history that shows exactly what this book is worth. It's nice when you have consistent sales, recent sales in a bunch of grades that are, in line. So we have the 2.5 sold for $6,755. The 3.0 sold for $8,200. The 3.5 just sold for $8,022, and the 4.0 just sold in June for $8,700. So I would value an Amazing Spider-Man #1 at $8,000 in today's market. I think that if it were to come to auction, it would likely fetch about $8,000, maybe a hair less. I mean, there's been, sales for less than that this year, but last 3, 78, 85, 82, I think 8,000 would be a reasonable price for a 3.0. So I said, it's $8,000. I can offer you 75% of that and cover the cost of shipping. And he said, oh, there's no way I could take that much. He wouldn't have even taken the 8,000, I don't think, because he said, I know how much I have into that book. And that's what was a really interesting thing that he said. And another interesting thing that he said was about a different book we'll talk about here in just a sec. But he said, I see this other book listed for such and such price, so I know mine is worth more. So we're going to talk about 2 things. One, which is I know what I have into this book, right? And if you're looking to sell, this is the first tip, is if you're serious about selling your book, you might as well forget what you have into that book. What you have into a book or a house or a car, for that matter, really has no impact on the current value of that book or house or car. It could be important. What you have into something is important to the extent that it might change your decision whether or not to sell it, but it does not impact the value of the thing. So just because you have more into a comic book doesn't mean that it's going to be worth more. And so if you're serious about selling, you're going to have to capitulate, which means surrender or, cease to resist this idea that you're going to get more for the thing and accept the current value of the book. And you're going to have to capitulate if you want to sell. If you don't want to sell, then just hold it. And I think that's what happens in this situation. I can 100% relate. I'm going to, show my personal example of how I can relate to this exact thing. But in this case, obviously we didn't make a deal. I offered 75%. I think I could have offered maybe up to 80% for a book like Amazing Spider-Man 1, but anything much more than that and you just start to like get basically to a point where it's a wash, or if a low sale comes in, you might end up losing money. So, but I do, always offer what I think to be competitive and fair price. Now, a little point up to make about this is, this person has several options. He could send this book to auction, which I have done before. I did it to test out, a set of books, like last year, I think it was, and it took like at least 3 months for me to get my money. So what happened was, I had to send the book to the auction house, which took time. Then they had to actually come to auction, which wasn't for like another month. Then the auction had to actually end and the book had to sell. And then the buyer had 2 weeks to actually pay for the book. And then the auction house had like 2 weeks to actually pay me for the books. So it ended up being at least 3 months until I got my money. It might have been even longer than that. I think one of the books, the buyer never even paid and it had to be relisted. It was just like, it just dragged on and on and on. And if you are in a declining market and you're going to send a book to auction and it takes 3 months, that book very well could come down 10 to 20% in value in 3 months in today's market. And then, it's going to take you so long to get the money. You may as well have just taken my 75 or 80% offer 3 months ago. You'd have been done with it and you would have walked away with about the same price. So I think 75 to 80% for Grails is a very reasonable fee. Obviously it's not going to work for everyone, but the best part about it is, you can ship that thing to me overnight and I can have you paid the next day, rather than dragging it out for all these months, having it in the back of your mind, wondering what it's going to sell for and thinking about it for all those months. A little sidebar there about, selling to a dealer. So now I want to mention the other thing that he mentioned that, is something to avoid, or at least be aware of if you're, serious about selling your comic book. He was talking about Malibu Sun number 13, 9.8, and he said, I see that Elite Comics has a Malibu Sun 13 9.8 blue label listed for $25,000. Mine is signed by Todd McFarlane, therefore I know that mine is worth more than $25,000. And that's just not the case. When somebody, you could list something for whatever price you want. That doesn't mean that that's what it's actually worth. And somebody, so the only sale point we have here to go on is there was a 9.8 Error Edition, and we're talking about the Error Edition of Spawn 13. There was one sale of a 9.8 signed by Todd. There's no sales of a blue label. But the Error Edition signed by Todd sold it at the peak of the market for $20,400. So, in today's market, I don't know. I just don't know what somebody would be willing to pay for this book in today's market. But it's just something to keep in mind. And somebody commented on a previous video because I made a comment, something to the extent of, it's a waste of time to list things at an I don't want to sell it price. And I actually agree with the commenter. He said, it's good for the hobby to have overpriced books on eBay or auction houses or, consignment sites or whatever, because that, gives the impression that your book is worth more, or that if there's a whole bunch of overpriced listings that are just thousands of dollars over the recent sale, it does nothing but good for the value of your book, because people that are interested in it will say, well, the only ones available are way overpriced. So I agree with them. Yeah, there is absolutely no harm in having overpriced books in the market. That it just actually, could only potentially help the actual sale of your book. However, if you are serious about selling it, you're probably going to have to capitulate and accept a lower price. A little side note about this book, just as a caution for anybody looking to spend big money on it. Somebody did reach out to me 2 years ago with a storage unit find. They had a pallet of books. I was going to buy the pallet of books. It was $50,000 he wanted, and because it had a ton of multiples of stuff from like the 80s and 90s, and we agreed on a price of $50,000. I was going to fly out and get this pallet. And then he called me back the next day freaking out because he was going through the pallet. He had just like picked away at it and came to the price of 50 grand. I said, I can make that work. And he started going through it more, and he found a stack of Malibu Sun 13 Error Editions. And I believe they came originally in a poly bag, and these if I remember correctly, they were still polybagged and he had a stack of them. And I thought, oh, that, doesn't bode well for the price of that book. That was like 2 years ago though, and looking at the census, I don't think that those have ever made it to the census. So I don't know what that guy did with it or how that story ended, but just a word of caution, I don't know how rare this book actually is, but again, a side note, I digress. So I had a recent real estate transaction that I think had some really interesting points that correlate with this about capitulation. I just sold a house in California. We just moved from California to Montana, and when I talked to my realtor and said, what should we price this book at, she said, well, you're not going to like what I have to say. And I said, oh great. She goes, I know what you paid for it, and I know you put some money into it, but this is what I think the book is worth, or the house is worth. And I said, wow, you're right, that's way less than I wanted to take. Here I go. And I was like, I just paid X and I just put this amount into it, so I'd like to list it for this price. And she goes, that's fine, we can list it for whatever you want, but your house is going to sell for what it's worth. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, if we list it for what you want to list it at, it's going to sit on the market for a long time until you decide to capitulate and either accept a low ball offer, which wouldn't really be low, it would be what it's actually worth, or you capitulate and drop the price and drop the price and drop the price until it finally sells. And she said, on the flip side, if you price the house $100,000 less than what I think it's worth, it's going to sell for what it's worth. She said, whether you list it for less than it's worth or list it for more than it's worth, it's going to sell for what it's worth. The only difference is how long is that going to take. She said, if you list it for $100,000 less than what it's worth, you're going to get multiple offers, it'll create a bidding war, and it will end up selling for what it's actually worth. I thought that was so interesting, and I said, well, I'd like to just start by listing it for what I would like to get for it, and see what happens. And she was 100% right. It just sat there on the market for a long period of time until I finally capitulated and accepted a lowball offer, which really was what the house was actually worth. And in that situation, I didn't have a choice, because my only other choice, rather than capitulating, was to hold the property until the market rebounded, which in the particular place that we were at in California, it was not anywhere in sight for the housing market to recover where I was at. There's a bunch of different factors for that, but I didn't have it in my budget to hold. I had to sell, so it was an easy choice to capitulate. Here's an example, and taking it back to comics, where I did have a choice of whether or not to capitulate, and I decided not to sell. I 100% relate to the guy who called me this morning. He was like, I know what I have into this book, and I'm not going to sell it for that. Same story for me with this book, which is Marvel Premiere number 15, in a 9.6 signed by Stan Lee. This is the first appearance of Iron Fist, and I way overpaid for this book. I paid $3,500 for this book, and I'm going to pull it up here on GPA. So pulling it up here on GPA, there was actually a strong sale of $1,750 for it here in May, but that seems like an anomaly high. There's some low sales of $900 for a Blue Label non-signed copy of this. Now, how to value Stan's signature on something like this? I believe there's only like 3 signatures in this grade or higher for this book. It's super rare, where there's only a handful in this grade signed by Stan Lee, and obviously there's not going to be any more Stan Lee signatures coming to market, so it's pretty unique and pretty rare in that sense. There's only a handful signed by Stan Lee, not the actual book, but the book signed by Stan Lee. So in a situation like that, I would value a Stan Lee signature anywhere from like $750 to $1,250, depending on how bad somebody wants it, but that's probably the range, $750 to $1,250 for a super rare Stan Lee sig on a book of this caliber. If you get up into mega grails, like first appearance of Spider-Man, and you could get like up to like a $10,000 premium. I think the biggest premium I've ever seen for a signature was $20,000, but it does cap somewhere, right? With a recent sale around, if wherever I were to value the Blue Label around $1,000, if it's worth like $1,750 with the Stan Sig, and I paid $35, I'm into this thing way more than what it's actually worth. And over the years, people have reached out and said, hey, I would like to buy that book off the wall behind you. I am willing to pay today's price, and I said, well, unfortunately, I'm not willing to sell it at today's price. For whatever reason, I can't capitulate on this book, and I think it's because it's signed by Stan Lee. But, you know, as a business owner and a comic book dealer, I have to capitulate all the time. I just capitulated yesterday on a book that I had priced 100% over the most recent sale. And so like I took a big fat loss on that, because when I bought the book, the last sale was X amount of dollars, and then somebody reached out to me after it sat there for a couple weeks and said, hey, you know, you have this priced at like $1,000, but the last sale was like, you know, $600. Would you accept $600? And I was like, yeah, of course I will. I will capitulate, because that is a book that I'm not looking to hold on to until it rebounds. I have no interest in that. Like I need to capitulate on that. This one, for whatever reason, I can't capitulate, and I think it's because it's so rare, signed by Stan Lee, and I'm a huge Stan Lee Signature Series fan. So if you ever see something on my website that doesn't line up with current prices, it's probably just because I hadn't seen the new sale that had come in, because I don't list things at I don't want to sell at prices. I don't personally do that because, you know, I'm running a business. I don't want to be seen as somebody who has books listed for more than they're worth. I want people to know when they come to my website that the current price is a good price. So I just don't have that pricing strategy as a dealer. I totally understand as a collector, it's a completely different thing. It's a completely different thing. And no, it doesn't hurt anybody to price things high as a collector. It also doesn't mean you're going to sell that book for that price. Some interesting points of discussion about pricing. Sorry I dragged on there a little bit. I hope this was helpful to some people, or at least interesting. Leave a comment down below something that you will never capitulate on, something in your collection that you overpaid for. It happens to the best of us. Thank you as always for sticking with me to end. Don't forget, we have those giveaways. Subscribe, comment, and like this video for your chance to win 2 slabs this month, and head over to brycecomics.com and sign up for the newsletter to get entered to win another 2 slabs this month. We also have a brand new collection just came in. Use code COLLECT10 for 10% off all in-stock items. That code is always active. And we will be having another slab show. There's a link down in the description for $15 towards your first purchase on Whatnot, where we'll do $1 starts on slabs. Tons of giveaways, chance at $1,000 store credit, and so much more. Thanks again for sticking with me. We'll catch you in the next video. Bye. On Callie. Callie. Come here. Hey, Callie. No. Oh, God. Oh, God.